All right, what's up, YouTube? This is BoxingWave, and I'm gonna discuss this whole Devin Haney, George Kambosos fight, which is official now. They're gonna fight in June. Doesn't We don't have an exact date yet, but it's gonna be in June. It's going to be in Australia. It's going to be a real undisputed match at 135. All right, wasn't expected for this fight to happen. I've made videos about this fight in the past. Was expecting Lomachenko to get the fight. But we'll go all into that. Okay, this is going to be a pretty lengthy video because it's a lot that I want to bring everybody up to speed when it comes to this. And the last couple of months since George won and beat Teofimo Lopez, once they started going into talks about this fight, it really became all about the politics. And we're going to discuss all of that, okay? First of all, salute to Lomachenko. Salute to also Alexander Usyk, okay? Just real quick, Ukrainian has been invaded by Russia. We all know this. Being that these are the two top fighters from that country, one has decided to stay in the Ukraine and be with his family, which is Lomachenko. The fight with George Kambosos was supposedly signed and set, but because Lomachenko made a decision to stay in the Ukraine with his family, this is the reason why that fight is not happening between Kambosos and Lomachenko. Much respect to him, and also much respect to Usyk for taking the opposite role here and continuing to fight for his country in the ring. All right. I see some people are criticizing these fighters for whatever decisions they decided to make. The only thing you really got to ask those people are, have your country ever been invaded before? Are you fighting at a world championship level? You know, who are you to really judge either one of these fighters? You know, I mean, I really don't have any stance for it. You know, if you decide to stay with your family or fight in war or fight for a title, whatever it is you're doing, I'm sure the people, that's really none of my business. That's for the Ukrainian people to judge. If anybody's going to be a judge, let the people over there judge. I'm sure there's people there that's going to want Usyk to continue fighting and representing their country in the ring. And I'm sure there's going to be people that think that Lomachenko should be a part of this war, you know, and fight for his country. All right. But it's really not my stance to call, you know, because I've never been in that situation. And if I had a family, I probably would want to be with my family. But if I was a top tier boxer of the world, I probably would want to continue boxing and representing my country. So I just wanted to say that because, you know, people get this. It's easy for people to sit at home and like myself on the couch and just be able to talk shit, you know. Moving on though, Lomachenko backed out of the fight, and this is why he's not getting the fight. And I expected him to get, and it was mainly because of the WBO strap. I figured that the WBO, being that he's with Top Rank, I figured that Bob would probably try to pull some strings and get him the fight, mandate the fight. So it would force George Kambosos to fight Lomachenko instead of fighting Devin Haney, so he won't get stripped of that title. That's what I expected. It had nothing to do with avoiding whoever. It was mainly about that WBO strap. All right. So let's just spin the block real quick and go back. And when the talk started, it really mainly started with Devin Haney. Okay, Lou DiBella is George Kambosos' promoter. He represents Team Kambosos, and you got Eddie Hearn still representing Devin Haney. Now, from the beginning, it seemed like it was some static because Devin Haney and Bill Haney, his father, was just, they wanted to have talks on possibly having a fight outside of Australia. Now, when George won, he made it clear, like, I want to have it in Australia. I want to have it in my country. I mean, this guy's a traveler. I mean, for the majority of his bigger fights in his career, the past, 5 years or so, he's been on the road. Him winning 3 of the 4 major titles. I mean, he has the 4 major, but we already know what the WBC. Devin Haney has the regular WBC title, and the franchise belongs to George Kambosos. But let's gonna stick with Haney being a WBC champ, because at the end of the day, you can't become undisputed without having Haney's belt, right? So he has the belt, in my eyes at least. Whether how he got it, that's not based on me. That's based on how the WBC made their rules, try to change the rules when Teofimo won the fight. But yeah, so going back to what I was saying, it seemed like the first line of static was Bill and Devin wanting to at least see what the numbers would be like outside of Australia. Now, I don't think there's anything, when you're going into negotiations, we know that Kambosos is going to be the A side. He just beat Teofimo Lopez, all right, who beat Lomachenko. So he's going to be the A side. He has all of the titles, most of the titles. He's the A side. I don't think there's anything wrong with them saying in a negotiation, hey, let's just see where the numbers would be like elsewhere. It doesn't have to be Australia. They want more money. They think there could be more money made in other places. Now, how can they prove that? I really don't know. If they can pack an arena in Australia, and, I don't really know how the business is going to work with that. But that's what negotiations is all about. I'm not in that room. I'm not in the phone calls. I'm not in these pressers. I'm not in, none of us are, so I'm not sure how that works. All I know is that Team Haney wants things to work a little bit in his favor. You know why? Because being that he knows he's going to be the B-side in this, he probably wants to strike that conversation because he wants to have it here. Why wouldn't he want to have it here? Because he knows that there's not going to be a home field advantage or disadvantage for him. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think there's anything with them bringing up the conversation or possibly having a fight elsewhere outside of Australia. And then it doesn't even have to be in America. It could be in Saudi Arabia. It's just that you have to prove to them that you can bring the money. I'm thinking that Team Haney and Eddie Hearn would have to bring some kind of offer to make them say, Team Kambosos say, all right, well, maybe if the Saudis can produce this kind of money to us, to our doorstep, then maybe we won't have it in Australia. We'll have it over here in Saudi Arabia, or we'll have it here in Vegas if somebody can put up that kind of funds. So that's what I'm thinking. But I don't think there's anything wrong with actually bringing that up. What I dislike about this is from Devin Haney. I don't know how long they was dragging this, but Ludabella and Kambosos fell back and they ended negotiations with Team Haney. I'm assuming it's because of that. I don't know why, but they ended negotiations with Team Haney and they moved forward with Team Lomachenko, which led to them eventually, signing the fight or working the fight out. Maybe they figured, what? Lomachenko agreed to all of our terms while Haney disputed some of our terms. So maybe that is the reason. I'm assuming that's the reason why they moved forward and to go into Lomachenko. But this is another problem I have. There's only one way to be undisputed. And if you have an option in fighting Haney or Lomachenko, my stance was I always wanted it to be Haney from jump, because Haney would make this undisputed. It would be no more debate or whether or not there's an undisputed champ at 135. It's been disputed all this time. Ever since Tio and Loma had their fight, it's been disputed. Tio's was running around here saying he's undisputed. Meanwhile, Devin is still a WBC champion. Now I know they watered down the title of the belt, but that belt was passed down to Devin Haney when he was the mandatory. Devin Haney was a mandatory before George Kambosos was a mandatory for the WBA or whatever sanctioning body he was fighting for. Devin Haney had been the mandatory way before that. All right. He was due to fight Lomachenko before Loma fought Teofimo Lopez. Now, my stance back then was I wasn't mad at the move that Lomachenko made in fighting Teofimo Lopez because this is a unification match, and I will always pick a unification match over a mandatory unless it's a more demanded fight, like a highly demanded fight. If it's between, if let's say Roman Gonzalez is fighting, I'm trying to think of an example, but I wasn't super excited about Jerwin and Casas, but that's a legit mandatory. But if there was a opportunity for him to fight Bam Bam Rodriguez, I probably would want to see the Rodriguez fight more. If you get what I'm saying, let's say if Bam Bam was his mandatory, those are those times where I'm like, I kind of would like to see that fight first, but I'm not gonna get mad at Roman Gonzalez for taking the unification match first, So that's just one example, but with this situation, I wasn't mad at Lomachenko fighting Teofimo Lopez over Devin Haney. At that time, Lopez has done more. He had a bigger win at that time. I thought, and I still think that at that time that Teofimo Lopez was a more dangerous opponent because of his power. He can box well, but he had the power, he had the size. And I said before the fight that Teofimo Lopez was the most dangerous opponent for Lomachenko at 135, which include Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia, and even Tank Davis. That was my stance on it. All right. But as far as this fight, I didn't mind it being Lomachenko. I didn't mind it being Devin Haney. I wanted Devin Haney because I wanted the Undisputed thing to be, I wanted it to be a real Undisputed champion. So that's why he was my number one. Lomachenko was my number two. And I would probably say Tank Davis was my number three. And those are the fights that I was cool with George Kambosos. I think Tank didn't have any interest in fighting George, and they're keeping everything in-house. I just wanted it to be anybody but Ryan Garcia, because I feel like Ryan didn't really bring nothing. He didn't have no belt, and he went out and retired for a short period of time because of mental health issues. And he's been inactive since winning his biggest fight in his career. All right. So I didn't want him to get it. That was my stance on that. So now we have Devin Haney. All right. Lomachenko pulled out. They started renegotiating. It seemed like it wasn't going to happen. It seemed to me like when I listened to Lou DiBella talk, and even some of the tweets and some of the comments that George Kambosos said, I didn't like what George said about something about his necklaces. He was talking about his jewelry and stuff. I didn't know what that was about. I'm just saying, like, what I don't like about people, if people make it seem as Devin Haney is not a valuable fight. Even Kambosos and his team, when Lou DiBella was so quick to just like brush him off and move forward, people like to pretend as if Devin Haney doesn't have anything valuable. All right. He's a top fighter in his division. He's undefeated. And he has a piece of what you need to become undisputed. I think that's more valuable than what anybody else has to offer. You might say that Lomachenko or Tank Davis might have a bigger name than him. But this guy has a piece of history. And if you're George and you want to become undisputed, and stand by your words or what you said after you won against Teofimo Lopez, I would go after Devin Haney. I try not to use Twitter too much because I feel like that's like the graveyard of just boxing talk, you know, the little bit of time that I spend on there. But I do get to see some tweets, and, you know, people are just sitting there talking about Devin Haney and his jewelry, and like everybody will find any reason to complain about Devin Haney. You know, they'll say his style is boring, which you know what that's about. His style is boring. He's wearing too much jewelry. He's too much flashy, this and that. I'm like, yeah, but at the end of the day, if you guys are as consistent, if you were as consistent as me, you would want Undisputed. Because at the end of the day, George can't become undisputed until he fights Devin Haney and take his title. So everybody could make it all about whatever they want. Oh, they could say Devin Haney struggled against Jojo Diaz, and you could say whatever you want. You could talk about his jewelry. You could talk about whatever you say. You don't mind. You might not like his style. At the end of the day, he has a piece of history in his possession. And this is why when the WBC continued to not acknowledge him, I said, don't worry about it. Keep that belt. When people say, oh, he should throw that WBC title in the trash, keep the belt, because it's still valuable. Because you cannot become undisputed without that belt. No matter who, even Mauricio Sulaiman, he looks crazy now trying to make it seem like Teofimo Lopez was undisputed when he made these rules. Once you created that franchise title, you changed the game. You know, the belt was never supposed to be transferable, but then it was as soon as Lomachenko lost. You get what I'm saying? We can't count on that guy. He changes the rules as he goes, depending on who's champion. I think the right thing, the more honorable thing to do here is have a real undisputed fight. You might not believe that Devin should get it first before Lomachenko. If that's how you feel, that's how you feel. But at the end of the day, Devin Haney is a guy that holds that piece of that puzzle. And I think that's the reason why he deserves to fight more than anyone. And plus, he's been mandatory for how long now? You know, it's been a minute. It's been a minute. All right, if we're being technical, and he's fought some of the better fighters more recently. You know, Jojo Diaz and he fighting Jorge Linares. When picking those are solid wins. All right. So now that we have the fight, the winner of this fight, there's going to be a rematch. From what I've read in reports, they're going to have a rematch clause, right? Which is pretty much a normal thing at this point. But it's going to be a rematch clause in Australia again. And then supposedly Lomachenko is next up after these two fights, right? So let's say Devin Haney wins. He has to fight George Kambosos again in Australia. And then after that, because now he had signed a deal with Top Rank, he's supposed to fight Lomachenko afterwards. All right, which I'm fine with. Those are all solid fights. You know, I don't want to see the rematch if the fight wasn't competitive. I wouldn't want to see a rematch. You know, if Devin Haney is to somehow dominate him on the cards, I wouldn't want to see a rematch. You know, I don't think this rematch clause thing's been getting out of control, but it is what it is, you know. But I'm not mad at him fighting Lomachenko. You know, it's a great fight. It's a fight that I wanted to see anyway. It's a fight that could have happened already. So I'm cool with that. You know, I have no problem with that. Now, as far as Devin Haney losing his independence and being pretty much a free agent, free to travel where, you know, as he please and fight on whatever network as he please. The only person that he was working with directly was Eddie Hearn and Matchroom as a promoter. Okay. He was working with him to get future fights put together and put into place. He has a relationship with the Zone. I know back in the day he has fought on Showtime. I remember watching him on Showtime. But he lost that now because he's going to be fighting with Top Rank, which is on ESPN. I give him credit. I give him credit because he tried at a young age, at 23 years old, already to, being a free agent. Most of these guys have to wait until later in their careers to do that. They have to get to a point where they're so valuable. They are more able to dictate what the terms of how the fights are going to go. Canelo's currently doing that, but he's just started doing that. Cotto was doing that at the end of his career. I know Manny Pacquiao left Top Rank, signed with PBC. I know Mikey Garcia has been doing it the last few fights he's had as well. So these are guys that's established. These are not 23-year-old guys. These are guys that's like 30 plus that were able to do this. I salute Haney for doing what, most fighters should be doing. Okay, not signing a slave deal, being free and open to fight the best, no matter where they're at. If they're located over in Showtime or the Zone or ESPN or Sky Sports or whatever they're at, he was free to fight anywhere. And I appreciate him for being 23 years old, and I'm sure that has a lot to do with his father and the people that he's come up with. He's come up on the Zab Judah. He's come up on the Floyd Mayweather. He's come up with people were able to watch over him so he could make these good. He's made millions already. I'm totally approve on what he was trying to do, but in this sport, unfortunately, when you're the guy coming up, you have to work with these promoters, you have to work with these networks, and he's pretty much purchased these belts. These belts are for sale. At the end of the day, no one's going to give you the opportunity to fight their fighters or fight on their networks without you having to lock yourself in. It's just the way to work. I mean, even the PBC tried to lock Canelo into multiple fight deals in order to do it. It's still going to happen at the end of the day. I salute him for trying to do it. I was listening to Barbershop Conversations, Fred. I was listening to his video the other day, and he made a video. He was basically saying that it's an 80-20 split. Now I know he has some people on the inside. Maybe he's right. I don't know if he's right or he's wrong, but he went a little bit into how Devin tried to be independent, and he failed at doing it by signing with Bob Arum. Plus everything that's going on with Top Rank between him and Bud Crawford, and not being able to promote black fighters. All right. This is part of the reason why they're having that lawsuit. Why would you sign to someone like Bob Arum right now? Well, it's not really about Bob. It's about Devin Haney and what he says in his press conference the other day. This is a dream for me. This is something I've always wanted. So if it's true that he only took 20%, he wanted to be Undisputed that bad. He wanted this fight so bad that he was willing to take a pay cut. And I'm sure he has, whether it's 2080 or not, whether that's true, I'm sure he had to take a pay cut. Plus, he had to sign with a promoter, and now he's stuck with a network in order to get that title. Now it's easy for us, guys like us that's sitting on the outside talking about what we would have done. It's so easy for us to sit back and say what we would have done. But we're not in a situation. We didn't grow up. We haven't been boxing since the age of 8. We're not fighting on that level. We're not making millions of dollars per fight. So it's very easy for guys like us and boxing fans across the world to sit back and talk about what we would have done. He's the one that has to get in the ring at the end of the day. Not Bill Haney, not Eddie Hearn, not Bob Arum, not fans of his. At the end of the day, it's his choice. And I think he made the right choice because he wants to be great. There's a lot of other fighters that's saying fuck legacy. It's all about the money. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of fighters that are doing the complete opposite of that. And they're getting scrutinized for saying they they're all about the legacy, but they're not chasing the belts. So I appreciate Devin Haney, and he's actually my favorite. I'm not saying he's the best, and I don't think this fight, beating George Kambosos, if he is to beat him, I don't think that proves that he's the best in the division. I think him being undisputed makes him the best officially. But there's still many fights that never happen. You know, you got quote unquote 4 kings in the division, and none of them really fought each other. You know, Ryan, Tio, Tank, and Devin Haney, the 4 of them still has not fought each other. You got George Kambosos out there. You got Lomachenko, who's in a generation above them. But Devin Haney, in my opinion, is not in my opinion, but he is my personal favorite because he's been pushing to fight these guys. Ryan, Tio, Loma. He's the one that's pushing to fight them. Tank Davis, face to face. You know, not just on the internet. And he's made some mistakes. He said certain things in interviews, but look at Ryan Garcia. Mental health. He needed a break. Cool. But does a lot of talking for a guy that's taking breaks and not really putting 100% in his sport. Teofimo Lopez, he still believes that the zone and Matchroom screwed him out of that fight. He doesn't even believe he lost at George Kambosos. He's completely delusional. I don't know what's going on with Teofimo Lopez right now. I hope he gets it together, but he needs, he's having a mental breakdown. Tank Davis, love him. He's my favorite as far as like in the ring. He's the most exciting to watch out of all 4 of those guys. But constantly gets into trouble outside of the sport. You know? He's going to trial soon over that hit and run, which I think he's going to beat. He's going to beat that. He's going to beat that. That's going to be very hard to prove that he was even involved or even prove that he was the one there, you know, unless he was seen there. But whatever. I'm not getting into all that. I don't think that's going to be a thing. You know, domestic violence stuff, guys ain't really focused like the way Devin is focused. Stays in shape in between fights, never gets into trouble, makes good investments, you know. There with his father. I love it. I love Devin Haney. I think he's the most balanced out of all of those guys over there. You know, you can say what you want about his skills and he's boring or his jewelry, because that's all I pretty much see. Just nothing, a bunch of losers on the internet just talking about how he spends his money. You know, I like him. He seems like the only one. I don't think he's the most exciting. I don't even know if he's the most talented. But I like the fact that he's putting in the effort. And they almost fumbled it, but they got it together and they made it happen. And I love it, man. I hope he wins against George. I want him to win. You know, I'm rooting for him to win. How do I think the fight is going to go? You know, this is not a breakdown video, so I'm not going to go into the whole full details of that. But I think he can win. But I also believe that, you know, he's fighting in George's backyard, you know. And I think of Manny Pacquiao, Jeff Horn, which is not a fight that I really believe was a huge robbery. I do think Pacquiao won the fight, but I thought the fight was closer than many fans believe it was. But I do think Manny won, edged it. But yeah, if the fight is close, Devin is not getting it. You know, if the fight is close and it's competitive, you know, to have an undisputed Australian fighter, you know, that's going to be big. You know, and I think if the fight is competitive, even if I think Devin Haney win or edged it, you know, like if it's going to be competitive like the way Josh Taylor fight against his last fight, which was everybody think was a robbery. What's his opponent? Jack Catterall. If it's close like that, Haney's not walking out of there with those belts. All right? And I do believe that Jack Catterall won the fight. But I don't think it was by a lot. You know, he's not walking out of there with them belts. It is what it is. You know, it is what it is. It's just too big. George is too important of a boxer for him to be walking out of there with those, you know, without those belts, unless he gets really beaten. You know, and I think Haney could beat him, but he would have to beat him clear, very clear. You know, and I think even if he does beat him clear, if he has to get rocked, happens to get rocked in the fight, if he happens to take a spill and he gets dropped at some point in that fight, it doesn't matter if the rounds is 8 rounds to 4. All right, doesn't matter if it's 8 rounds to 4 or 7 rounds to 5. You're definitely not gonna win. But if it's 8 rounds to 4, I expect it to be a draw. And I think if it's anything more than that, it has to at least be 9-3 or 10-2 clear for him to walk out of there with a split decision. You know, that's just the way I see it. It's nothing against George. It's just that I've been watching boxing for a long time. It is what it is. You know, I'm thinking there's going to be a draw, especially because they already signed for a rematch. I'm expecting it to be a draw, you know, because there's going to be another fight. So Haney would have to be dominant, and I think he could be. But then I think of Jojo Diaz's fight, where Haney clearly won, but it was like 8 rounds to 4. It was competitive, you know. It wasn't no sweep. It was competitive. I gave it 8 rounds to 4, maybe 9-3. I can't remember. I know he did beat Linares pretty clear, but he also got rocked. I think Linares is still the most dangerous because of his power is real, is bigger than Kambosos and Jojo. I think Linares just got real power, and I knew that one short right hand would be the one that would catch Haney. You know, I even talked about it before the fight. That was a punch I was worried about. George doesn't have the biggest power, but you can't sleep on him. But I do think that Haney, based on what we saw from Teal that night, Haney is going to be a tougher fight for George than Teal. Teal came in there unprepared. Wasn't prepared properly. You could see it in the fight. Was in there to get an early knockout. You can tell based on the corner and what his father was saying to him in the corner, you can tell that they prepared to get an early knockout and have an early night and then go as planned. And to this day, he's still delusional about it and believes that he got robbed. Think Devin Haney's totally different. His preparation is different. He's not going in there to try to knock George out right away, you know. I think he's going in there to box. He's one of those fighters that rarely loses any rounds. So we already know what he's coming in there to do. People say that Devin Haney doesn't have a chin, that George is going to test his chin. Again, possible. You know, we seen him get rocked a few times. Never seen Haney down, though, you know. So we got to see. We just got to wait and see. But I even think that comment is a little bit, I think people say it and like, listen, there's nothing wrong with getting rocked, you know, but he hasn't been knocked down. He hasn't been knocked out, and he hasn't even been close to losing a fight. All right, he barely loses any rounds, and I'm leaning towards him, but I feel like if the fight is competitive, I can see it being a draw. You know, just because there is going to be a rematch. There's a guaranteed rematch in this if the fight is competitive. And it could be competitive. Because I'm not sleeping on George because I did sleep on him against Teofimo Lopez. All right. So, listen, I love the fight. I love that we're getting another Undisputed fight. And, you know, I'm Team Haney. I'm all Team Haney. I do respect George as far as what he's done to get to this point. Winning that fight, being a 13-1 underdog. I don't like some of the things he said. You know, I don't like. I cringe when I listen to him talk sometime. But at the end of the day, it's a fight game, and he doesn't need to be friendly. You know, I don't think he's good at trash talking. Maybe it's just that. But I do respect him because he came to New York and beat George Kambosos, all right? And he's been in New York before. He's been on the road for a minute now, and I got to respect that. I think that's why I like Devin Haney for doing what he had to do, being the B-side, going to Australia. These are the risks you take. I wanted Wilder to do the same thing with Anthony Joshua when AJ was the A-side. I'm talking about in the very beginning. All right, I'm not even talking about the $100 million DAZN deal and none of that. I'm talking about in the beginning. I wanted Wilder to take the fight, go to England, do what he had to do, and bring those titles home. You know, and AJ is my guy. I love AJ to death. But at the end of the day, when this was all starting, I wanted Wilder to go, and I had my American bias. Once that fell apart, my position on him changed. But I wanted him to do what Haney is doing right now. You know, at the end of the day, fighters do it all the time. Even Canelo, who probably saw more pay-per-views against Floyd than Cotto did, he submitted, and he was the B-side when he fought Miguel Cotto because he had a respect for Cotto. Cotto's been in the game, you know, and Cotto has been in major fights for a long time. And even though Canelo was already a star, he was the B-side in that fight. All right. It is what it is. You know, Sergio Martinez was the B-side against Cotto when he was a champion. You know, Errol Spence, he went out to the UK and fought Kell Brook. And, you know, and I know Kell Brook was coming off of a beating. You know, I know he was weight drained. But at the end of the day, Errol wanted that fight before Kell Brook decided to fight Triple G. He was already the mandatory before that. So I love when a fighter goes to another country and wins and then bring them belts back. You know, Kovalev was doing it for years. You know, Triple G's been doing it. Listen, a lot of top fighters have to do it. You know, so I like that he's doing it because a lot of other fighters are not doing it. You got fighters out here that's keeping it in-house. You know, there's fighters out here that ain't doing shit. They're playing it safe all the way through. You know, all the way through. People say they want to be great, but they're not taking any risk at all. And they're not even hiding it at this point. Some of them are just straight up saying like, no, I'm not fighting that fighter. No, I'm not fighting this fighter. So I think it's dope that he's doing it. Salute to George for agreeing on it because George, the talk started with him and it started with Devin Haney and it ended with Devin Haney. All right. They almost went to Loma, but I just hate when people act like Devin Haney doesn't have anything valuable because that's bullshit. And if anybody's telling you that, I don't know if you listen to vloggers like myself, YouTubers like myself, anyone with a podcast, anyone that's telling you Devin Haney don't have anything, that's bullshit. Because it's only one way to be undisputed. You could hold 3 or 4 titles, but there's only one way to be undisputed. Right now, it's still disputed. All right? And this is the reason why George wanted this fight. I do think Lomachenko is the more difficult fight, though. Still. All right? That's just the way I look at it, man. I think Lomachenko, if he were to fight George Kambosos, it's not even debatable. I wouldn't even have the same discussion. I think Haney's going to win, and I think Haney's better. I don't think George is beating Haney. But I think Lomachenko would make it more clear, even him going to Australia. All right? But Devin Haney got a piece of the puzzle, and that's why he should get the fight. And I'm glad he's getting the fight, and I'm rooting for him. All right? So anyway, I think I covered all things George Kambosos, Devin Haney. I'll be back with a breakdown soon. You know, when we get a little closer to the fight. Got a tough schedule, big schedule coming up in April and May with fight breakdown. So, you know, I still got to do Ryan Garcia. That's coming up this weekend. So be on the lookout for that. I just uploaded the Triple G fight. Just finished recording that. So be on the lookout for more content. And make sure you subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.